The next morning, Claire acted as if nothing had happened. She hummed while pouring coffee, kissed my cheek absent-mindedly, and asked about my flight. I watched her closely, searching for any flicker of guilt, any hesitation in her movements. Nothing. She was either the best liar I had ever met, or truly believed I was too blind to see the truth. I spent the day replaying last night's events in my head. The way she had smoothed her dress before knocking on Ryan's door. The way she had smiled when she left, oblivious to the fact that I had been sitting in my car, watching her every move. And that text, "I miss you."
Long night at work.
As if those words weren't a slap in the face, as if they didn't confirm everything I had feared. That evening, she got home at her usual time, set her purse on the counter, and stretched like she had nothing to hide. I forced myself to stay calm. "How's Laura?" I asked casually, stirring my drink. She barely blinked. "A mess. Poor thing," she sighed.
We were up all night talking.
The lie rolled off her tongue effortlessly. I took a sip, watching her reaction. But she didn't even flinch.
Yeah, what was she saying?
She hesitated for half a second, so quick that anyone else would have missed it. "You know, the usual. Heartbreak, trust issues. She's thinking of moving back to her parents' place." I nodded slowly, forcing myself to hold her gaze. The only sound in the room was the distant hum of the refrigerator. "You know what's funny?" I said, setting my glass down. "I texted Laura this morning, just to check on her." Her fingers froze on the strap of her purse. "Oh, she said she hasn't seen you in weeks." For the first time I saw something crack in her expression. A flash of something: panic, anger, fear, but just as quickly, she composed herself, letting out a soft laugh. She probably misunderstood. While we talked on the phone, mostly. A masterclass in deflection. I almost admired it. Almost. That night, when she fell asleep, I went through her phone. She always kept it locked, but I had seen her passcode once, when she thought I wasn't looking. My hands shook as I typed it in. It opened. I scrolled through her messages. Most were normal, casual conversations. But then I saw a thread with no name, just a phone number, and inside, "Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. I wish I could wake up next to you instead of sneaking back home." He has no idea. I almost feel bad. Almost. My stomach twisted, but I kept scrolling. Then, at the bottom, the message that sent ice through my veins. "This weekend, our getaway. Just us. Can't wait to finally be free." Free. From me. I locked the phone, placed it exactly where I found it, and stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I wasn't just being betrayed. I was being erased. The moment she said it, I knew she had been waiting for this. "I haven't loved you for years. I just didn't have the courage to tell you." The words came too easily, too rehearsed. She wasn't nervous, wasn't hesitant. She was in control. I stared at her, searching for some flicker of regret, but there was nothing. Just finality. That's when I knew this wasn't a sudden revelation. It was an execution. She had planned everything. The suitcase by the door wasn't packed in a hurry. The account she emptied wasn't touched in a moment of impulse. It had all been done methodically, piece by piece, while I was still sleeping beside her every night, still believing we were living the same life. The evidence was all around me. I just hadn't seen it before. The work nights that stretched later and later, the sudden interest in keeping her phone locked, the shift from loving touches to absent-minded nods. And now, here she was, peeling herself away, like I was nothing but an old coat she had outgrown. She left, and the house felt different immediately. Quieter, heavier. I didn't touch anything she left behind. I let her scent fade from the pillows, let the silence take over. I didn't call her, didn't beg, but when I checked our bank account and saw the missing money, something clicked inside me. Not sadness, not even anger. Something sharper, something cold. This wasn't just a woman falling out of love. This was something else. I pulled out my laptop and started digging. At first, it was just to confirm what I already knew, that she had been planning this for a long time. But then I saw it. Strange transactions under her name. Small amounts, sent to unlisted accounts. The pattern stretched back years, payments every few months, never enough to raise suspicion, but consistent. Some of them had references attached. consultation, legal fees, investment transfer, but they didn't lead to any law firm or investment agency I could find. The more I looked, the more questions I had. And then, I made my choice. I didn't want closure. I wanted answers. I sold my car, left my phone at the train station, and disappeared. Renting a place under an alias was surprisingly easy. Cash deposits, an old idea I had from college, a simple lie about working remotely. No one questioned Daniel Reed when he signed a 6-month lease in a quiet town. No one cared who I had been before, but I wasn't hiding. I was hunting. Every night I went through the records again, mapping out her transactions, tracing the names. I didn't sleep much, didn't eat much either. I wasn't grieving anymore. I was reconstructing something she thought she had erased, because whatever Claire had been doing behind my back, it wasn't just about an affair, and I wasn't just a betrayed husband. I was a loose end. The moment I walked into that small unassuming bank and handed over Ryan's stolen card, I wasn't sure what I would find. But as the teller typed away, the screen flickered with something that made my stomach drop. The transaction log was littered with unfamiliar names and cryptic details. But what caught my eye wasn't just a random account. It was Parker Holdings. I had heard that name before. Claire had mentioned an investment under a similar name a few months ago. At the time I thought nothing of it. But now, seeing it linked to Ryan, the connection felt deliberate. I stared at the numbers on the screen, every inch of me screaming to get out, but my feet stayed frozen. I needed answers. As I walked out of the bank, I felt like the walls were closing in. The name Parker Holdings was linked to Claire, linked to me, and that wasn't a coincidence. She had once explained it away, as a harmless investment, a business opportunity she had stumbled across. But now, I could see the bigger picture. This wasn't just a failed investment or a misunderstanding. There were layers to this, layers that went deep into something criminal, something I hadn't signed up for. I couldn't sit with that knowledge. I couldn't ignore it. So, I found Samantha Lewis. I had heard about her work from a former colleague she had helped untangle complex financial scams. I called her with a burner phone, my hands shaking as I spoke to her in hushed tones. When she agreed to meet, I knew this was my only shot at uncovering the truth. Samantha's office was cramped, lined with old case files and dusty bookshelves. She didn't offer small talk. She just took the papers I handed her and started scanning. As she read, I couldn't help but watch her face. Her brow furrowed deeper with each document. When she finally looked up, the weight of her expression was heavy. "This is bad, Ethan. Your wife isn't just involved. She's complicit." Her words hit me like a freight train. I had always thought Claire's role was passive, a pawn in Ryan's scheme, but the documents I had stolen proved otherwise. Claire had signed off on transactions, significant ones. She had knowingly facilitated money laundering. She was in deeper than I had ever imagined. Samantha leaned forward, pushing the files aside. "I've worked fraud cases like this before. The offshore accounts, the shell companies, the forged contracts, it's all connected. Your wife may have started as an innocent bystander, but now she's part of this mess." That's when the reality hit. Claire had knowingly stayed in this web. She wasn't just a victim of Ryan's manipulation. She was a willing participant. She had signed off on fraudulent transfers, falsified records, and turned a blind eye to the damage she was causing. The accounts linked back to her Parker Holdings, her name appearing in places I never imagined it would. This was bigger than I ever thought. Samantha's warning echoed in my mind. "If you dig too deep, they'll notice." I felt the weight of those words. The danger wasn't just in uncovering the truth. It was in what would happen once the people behind the scam realized. I knew. I sat there in the dim light, the weight of everything crashing down on me. Claire's words echoed in my head, but they didn't make sense. Not yet. I had always thought I knew her. We had built a life together. But now, as I sifted through the papers, the bank statements and everything else, it was clear everything I thought I knew was a lie. The first hint had come weeks ago, when I saw a series of unusual transactions, small transfers to offshore accounts under names that didn't add up. At first, I brushed it off, thinking it was just a clerical error or something that would explain itself. But then I saw the name that would unravel everything: Parker Holdings, a name that shouldn't have been anywhere near Claire's financial records. I remembered her mentioning an investment a few years ago, Something about a joint opportunity she'd gotten into, but at the time it didn't seem odd. She had always been the one who handled the money, and I trusted her, but that name Parker Holdings was eerily close to ours. I checked the bank records more carefully. The dates matched with some of the most chaotic moments of our marriage, the times when she seemed more distant, more absorbed in her work. And then the numbers added up. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, moving through accounts I had no knowledge of. The moment I saw the transfers, I couldn't deny it any longer. She had been hiding something from me, something far darker than I could have imagined. I didn't just sit back and let this go on. I needed to know the truth. I had to see it for myself. I started investigating. I visited the small local bank where I knew Ryan had connections, disguising myself. I used a stolen ID card from his office, a card that I had borrowed from one of the briefcases I found. At first, the bank staff was reluctant, but I had done enough research on Ryan's company to know how to get access to the records. There in front of me were large transactions, money moving under the name Parker Holdings and being laundered through various shell companies. It was as if I had stumbled into a labyrinth of lies and deceit, all connected back to Claire in some way. The sickening realization hit me hard. Ryan wasn't just a homewrecker. He was a part of a massive financial operation, and Claire wasn't just an innocent bystander. She had been involved. Worse, she knew it. When I pieced together the timeline, the truth hit me like a punch to the gut. Claire must have been aware of what was happening for much longer than she let on. At first, she was just a legal front, an unaware pawn in a much bigger game. But somewhere along the line, she made the decision to stay in it. She got too deep. That's when I reached out to Samantha Lewis, the private investigator who had been tracking Ryan's company for months. She confirmed everything. Claire had been complicit. The magnitude of what I had uncovered was hard to fathom. I thought I was just dealing with a personal betrayal, but what I had found was much bigger. Something that went beyond our marriage, beyond even Claire. She wasn't just caught in an affair. She was caught in something much darker, something that threatened everything. When I confronted her, I expected anger, denial, maybe even a justification, but what I saw instead was fear. Fear that I wasn't prepared for. I didn't know what to do with the truth. It was a bitter pill to swallow, knowing the woman I had trusted, the woman I loved, had been hiding this from me. But it was undeniable. She had known, and now, I had to decide how far I was willing to go, to bring everything into the light. I could feel my hands tremble as I sat in that dark room. The air thick with tension. It was clear that Victor Hale wasn't just any criminal. He was something else entirely calculated, powerful, and watching my every move. I had barely crossed the threshold of his office before he let me know that he was fully aware of everything I'd been doing. The feeling of being hunted settled over me like a heavy cloak. I couldn't escape. He already knew who I was and why I was here. He'd been watching me, waiting for the moment when I would make my move. And yet I still couldn't back down. I had to play my part. Victor's calm demeanor made me sick. He was sitting there as if we were old acquaintances, offering me a seat, his words laced with a chilling form of politeness. I could see past the cold smile and into the cold, calculating mind that lay beneath. As he spoke, I had the unsettling feeling that every word was a weapon. "You've been digging, Ethan," he said, with a sharp edge to his voice. "You've uncovered things you shouldn't have, things that concern me." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. He already knew everything. I couldn't look away from his eyes, despite the fear crawling up my spine. "I'm not here to make deals," I said, trying to steady my voice. My body betrayed me, with a sharp intake of breath, as Victor leaned in slightly, the air between us thick with danger. "You don't get to make demands," Victor replied, "but I'll let you in on something." His lips curled into a smile, but it was the kind of smile that made my blood run cold. "I know all about your little investigation. You think you're clever? Samantha wasn't in that accident by chance. That was a message. A warning shot. For you." I felt my heart stop. Samantha, how could he know? How could he know? Everything. The sickening realization hit me like a hammer. This wasn't just about Claire anymore. It was about me. Victor had been following my every step. My efforts to uncover the fraud, the corruption, everything. And now, Samantha had paid the price for my curiosity. I fought to keep my composure, but I felt a pang of guilt for getting her involved. I knew it was a risk from the start, but I didn't think it would cost her everything. Victor's eyes never left me, like he was savoring my reaction. I don't take kindly to people poking around in my business, Ethan, but I'm giving you one last chance to walk away. Forget about everything you've learned, and leave. You and Claire can disappear. If you do that, I'll let you go. If not, well, you saw what happened to your friend. His words hung in the air, heavy, with finality. I had no doubt that he would kill me without a second thought if I didn't comply. But I couldn't stop, not now, not when I had already come this far. I gritted my teeth and forced the words out. I'm not going anywhere. This ends with you. Victor's smile vanished. In the space of a second, I saw something much darker in his eyes. It was a warning, the kind of warning you get from a predator before it decides to strike. His next words were quieter, but no less menacing. I've been watching you, Ethan. Your life, your moves, your weaknesses. You think you're in control, but you've already lost. My breath caught in my throat. I had never felt so small, so insignificant. But something inside me refused to give in. Something told me that no matter how many threats Victor made, this wasn't the end, not yet. I felt the weight of her words like a hammer to my chest. The moment I confronted Claire, I didn't start with the affair. I started with the money. I had to know why she had been transferring large sums, and why our financials looked so off. She didn't hesitate to break down in front of me, her face a mixture of fear and guilt, and as she spoke, the truth began to unravel. She told me, with a tremor in her voice, that she had known about the fraud, but what stung the most wasn't her confession. It was what followed. She admitted that she had been in too deep to back out. Ryan had used her, manipulated her, just as he had used so many others. He never loved her. She was a pawn. The most chilling part was when she mentioned Victor Hale, a name I'd never heard before. A man who had masterminded the entire operation. It was Victor who was behind the money laundering, behind the scheme that had used Claire as a legal front. I stood there, stunned. My mind raced, but I could hardly process her words. For the first time, I saw her not as the betrayer, but as a woman caught in a web she couldn't escape. She begged me to run away with her, to escape from everything from Ryan and Victor. But something inside me shifted. I wasn't ready to forgive her, not yet. I couldn't just walk away, not when I knew there was something much bigger at play. This wasn't just about a failed marriage. This was about revenge, justice, and uncovering the truth. I could feel the darkness pressing against me, knowing that if I didn't act now, I'd be trapped forever. I made a decision then. I couldn't trust Claire, not fully. She was too involved, too close to Ryan and Victor's empire. But I could use her. I told her I would help take down the operation, but I made it clear, I wasn't doing this for her. I was doing this for myself, for the truth that had been buried beneath layers of lies. As I moved forward with the plan, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was like a shadow had settled over me. I reached out to Samantha Lewis, the private investigator, hoping she could help me dig into Ryan's connections. But before we could get any real traction, something terrible happened. Samantha was in a car accident. The details were vague, but I knew this wasn't an accident. Someone was trying to warn me, to stop me from digging too deep. I knew Ryan was behind it, but I couldn't prove it. And now, with Samantha in a coma, I was on my own. Despite everything, I couldn't back down. I had to play along. I had to pretend to be a desperate man, looking for a way to get his money back. It was the only way to get close to Victor, to gain his trust. I sat across from him, in that dark, dimly lit office, feeling the weight of his eyes on me, as he listened to my story. He didn't speak, for what felt like an eternity. And then, he finally did. Victor knew everything about me. He'd been watching me for months. The moment he said it, I realized how far this had gone. Samantha's accident, it was no accident. It was a warning. My heart sank as I processed the truth. The stakes were higher than I ever imagined. I wasn't just a victim of betrayal. I was part of something much more dangerous. And the further I went, the more I realized that I might not make it out alive. I first noticed it on a Saturday afternoon. Jessica and I were having lunch at a cafe in the city. The place had a relaxed, upscale vibe, and we were sitting by the window. I'd been telling her about a new consulting project I was working on, explaining the potential benefits for the client. As I spoke, I noticed her attention shifting. Her eyes weren't on me anymore, but on the menu in front of her, scanning the prices. I thought it was odd, but I kept talking. Then, she casually said, "You know, if you were looking to expand your portfolio, there's a couple of tech startups I've been reading about. They've been doing really well." It wasn't the suggestion itself that threw me off. It was the way she said it, like it was a natural segue into talking about investment opportunities. It felt too rehearsed, as though she already had a plan in mind. I brushed it off and changed the subject, but the moment stayed with me. Later that week, I invited her over to my apartment to cook dinner. As we sat down to eat, I mentioned how I had just closed a deal with a new client. It was a big win for me, one I was proud of. Instead of congratulating me, Jessica leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "That sounds like a solid payout," she said. "If you wanted to reinvest some of that, I know a couple of hedge funds that could be worth your while." It felt like a pattern was emerging. She wasn't interested in the work I was doing or the challenges I faced. She was only interested in how much money I was making and how she could benefit from it. Her suggestions were always wrapped in this thin veneer of concern, like she genuinely wanted to help me grow my wealth, but I could see through it. It was clear she wasn't talking about the details of my life or the work itself, but the financial opportunities. Then came the night we went to a concert. We were walking to the car after the show when she mentioned, almost offhand, "If you're serious about growing your wealth, you should really think about diversifying. A lot of the top investors are looking at international real estate markets right now." I didn't know much about real estate, but I had never once heard her mention anything like this before. It felt like she was trying to plant a seed, pushing me to consider things I hadn't even thought about. The thing was, every suggestion came with the same tone. She was offering advice, but it was clear she expected something in return. I was starting to feel like I was being gently pushed toward a place where I'd need her. The final straw came when she asked me about a bonus I had received at work. I mentioned it casually, but she pressed me for specifics. "What are you going to do with that money? Any investments planned?" She wasn't asking out of curiosity. She was trying to gauge how much she could tap into. That was the moment it hit me. She wasn't interested in me as a person. She was interested in what I could provide. I could see the way she subtly tried to steer our conversations toward financial matters, how she'd drop hints about her own financial knowledge. It wasn't just about having a partner. It was about securing someone who could elevate her own status, someone who could make her future more secure. At that point, I began to understand everything about Jessica's behavior. The probing questions, the subtle suggestions, the focus on wealth wasn't accidental. She was calculating, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized how carefully she had woven her interest in me around financial gain. What we had wasn't a relationship based on affection or connection. It was a strategy, one she was using to build her own future, and I was just another pawn in her game. I still remember the moment I stumbled upon the truth, though I never expected it to come the way it did. It was just another typical night. We had dinner. Then I cleaned up while Jessica took her shower. She left her phone on the counter, buzzing occasionally with messages. Normally, I wouldn't pay it any attention, but something about the way the screen lit up caught my eye. Her phone had been buzzing for a while, so I figured it was just another work email or a friend texting her. But this time the notification preview was different. I could see David Harris's name, her boss, in a message that didn't make sense at first glance. The words burned into my brain as I read them. "If you play this right, Ethan will never know. We can have it all, but you need to get him to trust you completely first." I didn't know what to think at first. I stood frozen there in the kitchen, the phone in my hand, like it weighed a ton. My heart pounded, and every logical thought I'd had up until that point just disappeared. Slowly, my thumb scrolled to the next message. Jessica's reply was so much worse. "Don't worry. I'll make sure Ethan trusts me. He's too focused on his own stuff to even notice what's really going on. We'll secure the money we need." Everything came crashing down at once. Jessica wasn't just playing a part in this relationship. She was using me, actively manipulating me for a much bigger goal. I never imagined she would do something like this, let alone with her boss. The silence that followed her shower felt suffocating. I stood in the kitchen for what seemed like hours, my fingers still wrapped around her phone. I wanted to confront her then and there, to scream at her, but I stayed still, paralyzed. I couldn't make sense of it, and part of me still didn't want to believe it was real. When Jessica came out of the bathroom, she acted normal. She didn't look at me differently. She didn't sense that everything had changed between us. She asked if I'd seen the phone, and I told her I had. "It's just work stuff," she said, brushing it off like it was no big deal. But I couldn't ignore the coldness in her words. The way she acted like it didn't matter. The way she dismissed my silent suspicion with a casual flick of her hand. I could feel the distance between us grow, even if she didn't. For the rest of the evening, I didn't bring it up. I didn't challenge her. I just stayed silent, locked in my own head, unable to make sense of what I had just uncovered. That night, I lay next to her, the space between us wider than it had ever been. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd read, and how everything in our relationship now seemed like a lie. I wasn't just some guy she loved, I was an investment, a stepping stone, something to get her ahead in life. I had no idea how deep this went, or how far she would go to use me. The next morning, I finally asked her casually about the messages, playing it cool, as if it didn't bother me. "I saw some messages between you and David," I said. "What's all this about? Some business deals?" She didn't miss a beat, responding with a dismissive wave. "It's nothing, Ethan. Just business. You know how it is. I'm doing what I have to do to make sure I'm set." The way she said it, so casually, without even a hint of guilt, hit me harder than anything. She wasn't sorry, she didn't care. She just wanted her future, no matter who she had to use to get it. And I was a means to an end. I knew exactly what I was doing. Every action was carefully calculated. A slow and deliberate unraveling of everything Jessica had built her life around. I wasn't leaving anything to chance. The first step was moving the money. I didn't take it all at once. I wasn't reckless. At first, I transferred just enough to throw her off, small withdrawals that wouldn't trigger suspicion. $500 here, in dollars, 1-0 there. She wouldn't notice, not right away. I used a series of fake accounts, nothing tied directly to me, just names that wouldn't ever ring a bell. She never questioned it. Then came the apartment. I had already started the process of selling it without telling her. The real estate agent was someone I trusted, someone I knew wouldn't ask too many questions. I would casually mention the idea of downsizing, telling Jessica it was for the best, that we could find something smaller, more manageable. She would nod along, not fully engaging. She was already checked out mentally. One evening, I handed her the papers to sign, saying that I had already taken care of most of it. No argument, no surprise. The apartment was soon gone, and I had made sure that she wasn't in a position to ask where the proceeds went. She was just glad to be rid of the place, and I knew it. She didn't care about the details. All that mattered was that the house was sold, and she had her new life to plan. After that, I focused on the utilities. I called the companies and had everything switched over, each one under a false name or terminated altogether. I could hear her in the other room, getting frustrated as the bills piled up in her name. She would complain about how nothing seemed to be in her name anymore. She didn't understand why the electric company was calling her, or why the water bill was overdue. I'd sit there quietly, knowing I had already planned for all of this, and I let her struggle with it. The final touch came with the note. It wasn't a grand gesture. I knew it had to be subtle, enough to make her question everything without giving away my hand. I wrote it on a simple piece of paper, the words clear but cryptic. "Greed has a way of catching up to you. Don't worry, your little secret won't stay hidden for long." I left it on her pillow. I watched her from the doorway, as she picked it up, her eyes scanning it. The panic in her expression was instantaneous. She didn't say anything, not directly to me, but I could see it in her face. The guilt, the uncertainty. She couldn't make sense of it. Was it me? Was it someone else? Did she know what was coming? She wouldn't find out the truth, not yet. The plan was too perfect. She never connected the dots. Every discrepancy, every strange happening, she dismissed it as coincidence, or bad luck. The accounts? A mistake. The bills? Miscommunication. She didn't know it was me. Didn't know I was watching her fall apart, piece by piece. I saw her confidence slip, her sense of control unraveling, and I couldn't help but feel satisfaction. This was my revenge, and it was all unfolding exactly as I'd planned. I remember the day Jessica first showed signs of unraveling. It started subtly. The first eviction notice arrived in the mailbox. A gentle nudge at first, an official letter politely asking for overdue rent. She must have thought it was a mistake. She tried to call the landlord multiple times, but the number was disconnected. I'd made sure of that. Then came another one, and another. A cascade of unpaid bills she thought she could ignore, until reality hit her like a ton of bricks. Her financial situation was in freefall, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. I watched her desperation grow. She started coming home late, her eyes wide with panic, hands shaking as she checked the bills stacking up on the counter. She asked me once about a transaction in the joint account, but by then, I had already transferred everything, leaving behind just enough to keep up appearances. When she couldn't reach me, she turned to the one person she thought would support her, David Harris. I knew it wouldn't take long for her to call him. She always thought of him as a backup, someone who had more power, more connections, someone who could fix her mess. So when I saw her typing frantically on her phone one night, the tone of her voice was already familiar to me, pleading, trying to sound in control. She said, "David, I need help. I can't do this alone. I thought we had something. Can you help me get back on my feet?" David's response was exactly what I expected. His indifference came through the phone loud and clear, though I wasn't there to hear it. I could already imagine his cold, calculating tone. "Jessica, I'm not going to risk my reputation over this. You knew what you were getting into. This is your mess, not mine." She hung up, visibly shaking, her face contorting with disbelief. I could feel the anger radiating off of her, but there was nothing left for her to do. She was on her own. Then things started to shift even more. The phone calls she used to get from friends suddenly stopped, one by one. At first I thought it was just coincidence, but when I saw her staring at her phone, waiting for it to ring, I realized she was losing the connection she had carefully built. Everyone saw through her act in the end. It wasn't just her losing money, she was losing everything she had worked so hard to build. The phone calls stopped coming, and I knew Jessica was starting to feel the weight of her choices. One night, she finally confronted me. Eyes red from crying, she asked, "What did you do to me, Ethan?" But she didn't know how deep the game was. She couldn't see it, the web I had carefully spun around her. She suspected me. I could see that, but there was nothing she could point to. No direct evidence, just a mounting sense of paranoia. By then, I could feel her turning inward. She knew it wasn't just bad luck. She was no longer asking questions. She was searching for answers. Answers she was too afraid to find. I had been following Jessica for a few weeks now, watching as her life slowly unraveled. It was a strange feeling, one I couldn't quite place, but I knew it was the right thing to do. It was the only way I could truly see the full scope of her actions. She didn't know I was watching. Of course, just like she didn't know I had planned everything to this point. But today was different. Today, I knew it would all come to a head. I had learned enough, seen enough, and now, it was time to face the truth. I spotted her outside the coffee shop, pacing as if she had somewhere to be but didn't know where. Her usual confident demeanor was replaced by a subtle anxiety. She kept glancing down at her phone, tapping it with her fingers in a rhythm I recognized, a pattern she had when she was trying to cover up something. Her usual network of friends wasn't around, and for once, there were no quick conversations with acquaintances. She was alone, vulnerable, as if she were waiting for something or someone. Then, I saw Mark Collins, my lawyer. He stepped out of the coffee shop, looking as he always did, but there was something in the way he looked at Jessica that caught my attention. He wasn't buying her charm, and it was obvious she wasn't used to that. I watched from the corner of the building, hidden in the shadows, where she couldn't see me. Mark and Jessica exchanged a few words that I couldn't hear, but I could tell from the body language that this was no casual encounter. There was tension, something that neither of them was willing to say out loud. I could tell Mark wasn't just being professional, he was laying the groundwork for something important. And Jessica, she looked rattled. They walked toward the park, Mark leading the way, and Jessica trailing behind, hesitant. I decided to follow them, my heart pounding, as I knew I was about to witness the final unraveling of the woman who had destroyed everything I cared about. They stopped by the old bench, where we used to sit together. I stayed back, just far enough to observe, without drawing attention to myself. Mark turned to her, and his lips moved in a way that I couldn't hear, but I knew it was the moment. I knew he was telling her the truth, and then, her face changed. Her confident facade, shattered, replaced with a look I hadn't seen before, genuine fear. Mark had just revealed what I had orchestrated, that I had disappeared on purpose, that I had pulled away. Step by step, carefully dismantling the life we'd built. He told her everything, how I had left her, to face the consequences of her greed and manipulation. How I had planned it all. She was the reason for my disappearance. I hadn't run away out of spite or anger, but out of necessity, out of survival. Jessica's eyes widened as the weight of what Mark had said sank in. For the first time, she realized the power she thought she had was nothing but an illusion. I had been in control all along. She had been so focused on her own ambitions, on using me for her gain, that she never saw how she was digging her own grave. Mark's words broke through her carefully constructed reality, and the facade of confidence she had worn so long melted away. She was now a woman who had to face the harsh truth of her own making. There was no escaping it. The game had changed, and Jessica was now the one who had lost. When Jessica returned to the apartment, it was like walking into a place that no longer belonged to her. The once familiar clean lines of the living room felt cold, and the distant sound of city life from outside no longer held the same charm. The space was sterile now, a painful reminder of what she had lost. She thought she could just walk back into it, that it would still be hers, but everything was different. Ethan was gone. The weight of his absence sat heavily on her chest as she stood in the doorway, taking in the room she used to control. The phone buzzed on the table. She didn't want to check it, but she did. The message from an unknown number sent a chill through her, and her fingers trembled as she unlocked the screen. It was from Ethan, and as soon as she read the first line, she could feel the floor beneath her seem to tilt. "I'm sure you're wondering where I am," the message began. "The truth is I needed to leave. I needed to find peace away from everything. Away from you, away from the lies." His words were final, detached, as if he had already accepted the reality that they were no longer part of each other's lives. She sank into the couch, the message in her hand feeling heavier with every word. Ethan had always been someone she thought she could control, someone whose ambitions she could shape, but in the end he had escaped. The note was not just a goodbye, it was a reckoning. He had found his peace by leaving her behind, something she couldn't fathom. In his absence there was no anger, just a cold distance. He had seen through her manipulations, through her greed, and now he was gone, and she was left with only the broken pieces of her choices. Jessica's eyes blurred as the tears began to fill up. She wiped them away angrily, unwilling to let herself break. She reached for her phone again, almost desperate to see if there was more, but the screen remained locked. Her thoughts raced, and a realization hit her. This was it. Ethan was gone. Her manipulations, her carefully laid plans to climb the social and financial ladder, had all backfired. She had treated him like a stepping stone, never thinking that the foundation beneath her was more fragile than she had ever realized. The phone buzzed again. This time it was an email notification. She didn't need to look at it to know what it was, a reminder of unpaid bills, overdue financial obligations. The world she had created for herself had fallen apart, and now, every part of it was unraveling. But the thing that hurt the most, the thing that stung her deeply, was the knowledge that Ethan had left because of her choices. He wasn't just angry or heartbroken, he had left to save himself. He had seen the person she had become, the person she had molded out of greed and selfishness, and he had chosen to walk away from it. She thought she had the world in her hands, but now she was facing the ruins of everything. The apartment, the financial security, the relationships, it was all gone. And as she sat there in the silence, the last message from Ethan replaying in her mind, the only thing she could feel was the weight of her own decisions. She had created her own downfall, and now she had to face it. There was no escape this time. No one left to blame but herself. The path ahead was uncertain, but she knew one thing. This was the consequence of everything she had done.